Okay, next up, Adam Bryant Miller.
Hi, everyone. So I am going to tell you a little bit about some recent studies that I've been conducting in my lab. So my program of research, at least a portion of my research, is interested in investigating neural mechanisms that may underlie common risk factors for adolescent suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And in particular, I'm interested in whether these neural markers can help us understand the emergence of adolescent SITBs at the transition to adolescence, and then if they can help us understand what's happening in the acute moments of a suicidal crisis. So one mechanism that's commonly been associated with adolescent suicidal self-injury and behavior is disruptions in emotion regulation. And it's something that's come up multiple times today, and you've seen it emerge as an independent predictor in a lot of studies as well. And we've seen that emotion regulation difficulties are linked with suicidal behavior, ideation and behavior, both via self-report, and then also through some early studies with psychophysiology as well. And the idea behind this, of course, is that when something happens to an adolescent in the environment, they face a stressor or some type of acute event, most adolescents are going to have some type of reactivity and have a protracted period of recovery. That's normative for adolescents. But some youth might have either an overreaction to certain stressors or underreact to certain stressors as well, in which case these kids might be at most risk for suicidal thoughts and behaviors in the acute moments of crisis. And so all of the neural system, or sorry, all the peripheral biological systems that are in charge of helping the body react to stressors are initiated, terminated, and modulated within regions in the brain. So what I have been doing is conducting a series of studies to try to investigate this. And in one of my early studies, this is a sample of 49 adolescents. And to orient you a little bit here, this is obviously a brain. It's both sides of the brain, the left and the right hemisphere. In the back here, that's the occipital lobe where you see both colors overlapping. And then what I have circled here with the black circle is an area of the prefrontal cortex that's been repeatedly implicated in the cognitive control of emotion. And what you can see here is that adolescents, this was comparing adolescents with and without a history of suicidal ideation. And what we found was that adolescents without suicidal ideation in red were automatically engaging these prefrontal cortex regions when we were showing them negative images. So this is when they're in the scanner looking at negative pictures. In comparison, you can see here that the adolescents with suicidal ideation histories were not automatically engaging those regions during this type of trial. And so although this was an early study, our initial interpretation is it's possible that adolescents with suicidal or who are at risk for suicidal ideation may not automatically engage regions that we know to be implicated in the cognitive control of emotion. But like many of you, I'm very interested in predicting future behavior and future thoughts. And so I was really excited to be able to try to replicate and extend this finding in a larger sample of adolescents that we actually had longitudinal data on. So this is hot off the presses, finished this literally a couple weeks ago. And so what this is this is the same type of task. And this is an association where we were predicting suicidal ideation over the period of 2 years. This data set was not designed to answer the question in the way that we wanted to, but we're making the best of what we got. In here, we're able to see that this same region, here it's shaped slightly different, but it's over here in our left side of the brain here. What you can see there is that less activation in again, this is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, was associated with future suicidal ideation severity, even after we accounted for age, biological sex, child abuse severity, and prior history of severe suicidal ideation. And over here on the other side, so this is the same brain, it's just flipped now, so you're looking at the medial side of the brain, and we see less activation in the superior frontal gyrus and the anterior cingulate, both of which are regions that help coordinate cognitive control over emotion. And so this was a prospective association after accounting for well-known risk factors for suicidal ideation. Another part of my research is interested in what are the potential mechanisms that may link childhood adversity with future risk for suicidal ideation severity, given the strong association between those two things. And so what I did to test this in this particular sample is I extracted activation from the original study, so using an independently defined ROI. I extracted that area in this current sample, so in this separate sample, and looked to see whether that helped mediate the association between child abuse severity and future suicidal ideation, and that is indeed what we find. So child abuse severity predicted lower activation in the DLPFC, which was associated with future risk for suicide. And the reason that this less activation thing is interesting is it's because we know that greater activation in this particular region during cognitive control of emotion is associated with more positive control over intense emotion. So it's a region that we know is necessary to regulate emotion. And so what we're seeing here is some potential specificity, although these are early, these are still pilot studies. I'm doing other research right now with bigger samples, But there's some potential specificity here within this region that we know to be implicated in the cognitive control of emotion. That's it. 4 slides.